Hello, we're live. Sorry about the late start. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I'm Brandon Testers. I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for very, very many reasons. I'm going to try and blaze through the intro here because we are getting a late start. As you can see, I'm in a different location today. I am at the lake with my family this week, and among the many unusual and potentially ridiculous things that I do, one of them is that I'm very dedicated to keeping the stream going at the same time every week so that it's a resource for people the way that I want it to be, including doing it even when I am not at the office. So that's why with the late start, some tech issues, and hopefully the internet holds up and everything goes well. But I will also potentially have people walking in and out of the room that I am in, and we'll make do. Um, Frankly, if this is one of the weeks where we don't get a lot of people talking in the chat, I might wrap this thing up early. But if you're here in chat, I would like to stay the whole time and answer questions and talk like we always do. Uh, Next week, we'll be doing this stream instead of on Wednesday. Unfortunately, the next two Wednesdays, I'm on a plane at the time that I would be doing the stream. So it's legitimately not an option. So next week on Tuesday, we'll be doing the stream at 1 p.m. Central Time instead of Wednesday. And I'm literally checking my calendar right now as I'm saying this. The following week, we'll do it Thursday at 1 p.m. instead of Wednesday at 1 p.m. So that's next week, Tuesday the 2nd, and the following week, Thursday the 11th at 1 to 2 p.m. instead of Wednesday the next couple weeks. I am flustered, running late, having tech issues. Did I say everything? Let's see. Okay. This is an open conversation that can be questions and answers, but really it's just the fact that when people are aware of each other, when people think of each other, then our awareness, our perception of each other impacts what we're doing and what we're thinking and what we're feeling. And so while I'm here, if you're here too, whether you're here live or after the fact, watching this as a VOD, theoretically you're aware of me to some extent. And that's impacting you. If you're here in the chat, I'm aware of you as a specific individual and the things that you're saying, and that impacts what I do and say. If you're not in the chat, then I just am impacted by my awareness of the idea of theoretically people who would be watching this. Why would they be watching this? What would they be looking for? So it's more general. But that's just what communication is. That's what community is. So we're here together to do that stuff. So I usually pick a topic, not usually. I always start by talking about something, but we can go wherever we need to go. Those of you who are here, if you're in the chat, you take priority. We don't have to stay within the bounds of what we started out talking about. I run a practice that does individual and couples and family therapy, as well as some group therapy that we're getting started. Particularly, the next thing getting launched is a parents group for neurodiversity affirming parenting, basically, parents of neurodivergent children wanting to learn how better to support those children. We also do executive functioning coaching, individual executive functioning coaching. We're called Effective Artistry. That's our logo there in the corner. If you do comment, if you're on Facebook, it'll be linked to your Facebook account. If you're on YouTube, it'll be linked to your Google account. And if you're on Twitch, it'll be linked to your Twitch account. So just keep that in mind with anything you're putting out there. And I think that's basically it. I am very flustered. I'm even getting sweaty, even though it's lovely where I am. I'm in Michigan right now, and it's lovely. Let's talk about context, just generally, especially though big shifts in context. A lot of people, well, let's start by talking about what I mean when I say context. Context is, think of it in terms of reading. When children learn to read, they learn context clues, right? Use context clues. What it means is that stuff, those things, the facts, the reality that impact what a thing might mean, right? So if I say duck, the context around it, whether it's in writing, the words around it, or in speech, the words around it, or in the situation in which I am saying it, the context gives you a sense of, do I mean the waterfowl or do I mean drop low really quickly so that you avoid something coming at your head, right? So context means it's stuff outside of us. No, that's not true. Here's how I can do it best. I tried not to do it this way, but I couldn't make up a better way to do it on the fly. So I'll do it this way. I think I like to divide context up into two parts. To me, I find it useful to divide it up into two categories. One is the physical environment. So at any given moment, what is it that's around you that you can see and hear and taste and touch and smell? Who is there? What is the reality of the situation? But that doesn't encapsulate everything, because our thoughts are part of the context, if for no other reason than because of what we understand other people's communication to be. One second, I'm going to close this door that just flew open. In other words, just in the physical environment, there's this person talking to me. The fact that that person is my boss, and the fact that, you know, we are having a meeting about whatever, that's not in the physical environment. That's a thought. That's in the cognitive environment. So that's an element of the context as well. Context is that stuff that varies from moment to moment, from situation to situation. I am who I am. That's going to stay the same, right? I, as an individual, change moment to moment in infinite, tiny little ways. Cells are dying and splitting and blah, blah, blah all the time. Yeah, that tortured duck sound was my soon to be 10-month-old. He's happy though. We have a little screened-in porch here. I'm looking out the window at the screened-in porch where my family's eating lunch. Yeah, context. Man, I am flustered. So shifts in context mean that we shift in response to that context. Sometimes we're talking about that in terms of the accomplishment equation, like we talk about all the time, that the context can make it so that accomplishing task X becomes more or less costly for me. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I have such a wonderful and beautiful family. It's kind of fun to watch them while I'm doing this. Never had that experience before. Probably also not helping with the fact that I'm scattered. So anyway, I'm over explaining things. Point I was trying to get at is we've all heard things like, if you're trying to break a habit, do it when you're having some other big contextual changes as well, right? Like if you're trying to quit smoking, go on a vacation and try to quit smoking while you're on vacation. And it's true, being in a new environment is a huge contextual shift. It does so much that we just don't notice on levels that are granular and specific that we just don't notice. We might notice things that happen, but as always, we as humans have a tendency to come up with narratives that explain any changes or any experiences in terms of our psychology and our autonomy. What am I doing differently? What am I thinking? What do I care about differently? We tend not to think, I guess when I'm at home, the place where I live and spend most of my time for 5 years now, I don't have to spend as much of my resources paying attention to literally physically navigating the environment without bumping into stuff, right? I have the lay of the land and I can kind of go on autopilot. Think of it like when you are driving somewhere for the first time, the amount of effort that takes. I thought I had closed it better than that, but I guess not. Yeah, watch out, mouse. I don't know that it does close all the way. Maybe that'll just keep opening, and that's fine if it does. The first time you drive somewhere, the amount of attention that you have to pay to what you're doing, the amount of cognitive effort you have to put into remembering where you're going, remembering the directions, following the directions being given to you, some version of that. The 100th time you're doing it, you don't think about it at all, right? You get to that point where you start the trip and then you arrive at your destination, and in between, you noticed nothing about your actual physical environment. Obviously, your brain and your body did. You stopped at red lights and you turned at the time to turn. But if there was any conscious effort involved, it was on such a minor level that you didn't even notice or remember it, right? So then you start to think and dream and whatever. When you're in a new environment, safe, unsafe, whatever, you're going to be spending a lot more of your resources on the physical reality of your environment than when you're in a place like your home that you spend most of your time, which means those resources can't go to other things. So when you're at home, you might be thinking a lot about these big, long, complex narratives about what about this? Why am I doing this? Why am I feeling this? And then when you're away, you don't have time to think as much about all that, which is a really kind of cool opportunity. Partly, yes, we can talk about shifting habits, and I would love some specific questions to help guide me, especially when I'm feeling flustered. Uh, Partly for things like that, but also partly just for the experience of observing the changes, because some of the problems that people experience, especially neurodivergent people, the kind of people who are here, some of those problems are problems that are not actually helped by thinking about them as much as they are being thought about. In fact, some of those problems are caused by or worsened by thinking about them. And the more you think, the worse that they get. So if you're having some problems, emotional, cognitive, whatever, behavioral, if you're having some experiences that you don't like and you're in a new environment and it gets better, one thing to always consider is it might be because I can't think about it as much, which might mean that the thinking about it as much as I'm thinking about it is part of why it's a problem. Some things might get worse, which would reveal to you that at least one thing to explore is maybe the extent to which I am thinking about that thing or dedicating resources to that thing is part of what's keeping it going as well as it is going. I've been desperately needing to change my environment to get work done, but I only have the programs I need on my desktop. All I want is to spend all day at a coffee shop. I'm willing to spend money I don't have because I know it helps, but still can't. It's really frustrating. Oh, I see. I misread that at first. Just point out communication, right? Context. I misread that because I read desktop as the desktop of my computer, as though what you were saying is in order to help yourself to be more productive, you had already cleared off your desktop of all but the programs that you need. It took me a second to realize you meant no, your desktop computer, which is not mobile. Needing to change my environment to get work done. So here's a little I don't know. I come up with all these little pithy things that I then think are corny, but they're useful. Here's one of those things. If you're going to say need, you have to put the context around it. If you don't, the understood context is if I don't X, I will die. If I need to blank, it's in order to, like in this case, get work done. Then we can take it to the next level, right? Because you're already saying what I need to change my environment in order to get my work done. But that can't be true, meaning that there must be other things, other variables that also impact your ability to do work. It can't be that this is the only variable that can be changed. So then we want to expand out and look, clarify problem versus theory, right? Like we've talked about, I'm tired. That's the problem. The theory is I'm tired because I didn't sleep well enough. And then an extension of that theory is therefore, if I go to bed early tonight, I won't be tired tomorrow. That's a great theory. But if then tonight I don't go to bed early for whatever reason, I can't, something came up, I don't want to, whatever. uh, then it turns into a sticky answer because we have an answer, we just can't test it to see whether it's useful. And now the problem is I can't get myself to go to bed early, and we forget that the real problem was I'm feeling tired, in a way that I don't like. So in this case, you're still clear on what the problem is. You're needing to get work done, and you've got a theory, changing my environment will do that. We can go down this road where we're turning that into a sticky answer, kind of, right? Where we start to say, okay, I can't change my environment because I need to be on my desktop. So, given that constraint, what other things can I do that will change the environment? And there are things that we can talk about there. Also, we could say, because of the fact that I can't move my desktop and I need all those programs there, I don't want to spend more time trying to explore how to make this particular intervention work. Let me go back and see what other things I might be able to do that would help me to get work done. But for now, until and unless you say something different, we're just going to assume that we don't have another option, that it has to be changing the environment, even though in reality that can't be the case. There's things I can do to make it easier here, but coffee shop's the only thing I found that really help. Okay, I like that. And just because a solution has worked for you in the past, hello, buddy. Augie. I am talking to nobody, not nobody. I'm talking to people who are communicating with me in writing. And I'm using language that doesn't make sense to use with you, my wonderful 3-year-old. Have a fun nap, buddy. I'll see you again soon. Uh, yes. So a solution that has worked for you in the past might not always work for you in the present or in the future because the context shifts, including things that we don't notice and we can't be aware of everything, right? From moment to moment, there's never the exact same context repeated. Mostly, hopefully, especially if we're getting involved consciously in dictating interventions and things like that, hopefully mostly that context is shifting in ways that don't take whatever intervention or strategy we've used from being useful to not being useful, because there's a bar there, right? But sometimes that happens. In addition, that's a sticky answer, right? I have found a thing that works for me, so now I'm dedicated to making this thing work for me again, but I can't make this thing work for me, so how do I make this thing work for me, as opposed to letting go, going back and exploring other options, what other things might you be able to do? So one way we can do that, and I can just ask you, I'll focus in specifically on you since you're chatting, and I appreciate that. What is it that you're saying? You say changing the environment, specifically about going to a coffee shop, enables you to get work done, takes you from not getting work done to getting work done, or takes you from doing work inefficiently to doing work more efficiently? Which of those is the case? Answer if you care to. And this is a delay, so I'll keep talking while I wait for that. Um, and in addition to that, what is it that you think? What is it about the coffee shop? Johnny, come on in. It's okay. Um, what are your theories about why that coffee shop, being at the coffee shop, enables you to work? What is it that about that environmental shift, that contextual change that takes you from, thank you for answering, from not getting work done to getting work done? Because that's what when we're talking about context, we can group it all up, lump it all up as being at the coffee shop, but it's unlikely, nigh unto impossible, that that one specific arrangement of variables is the only one that will work for you on something as broad as getting work done, right? So there's elements of that experience that matter. And at first, cognitive miser, we don't spend resources without a reason. Why bother breaking it down into pieces and trying to figure out what about it is useful for me when I can just do the full thing, right? Go to the coffee shop. But later, when going to the coffee shop all of a sudden isn't an option for me, if that's the case here, then it becomes useful to go back and break it down and say, okay, what elements of it seem to be helpful for me? Because then I can explore what elements can I get from some other thing that is possible, even though I can't go to the coffee shop, or what can I replicate in some other way, or what things can I do that gets as close as possible. There's just the right amount of engagement around with the music and noise and people around who are also working in person around food and drink available readily, the change of space. Okay. Music, noise, people who are also working in person. Sorry, I'm getting like a bunch of notifications on this laptop that all pop up and block the chat. Food and drink available readily, the change of space. So change of space obviously is something that we can get with any location, any new environment. So anything other than the space where your computer is at your home right now. Food and drink available narrows things down. Of course, we could also explore, and potentially this would work for you, potentially it would not, bringing food and drink with you to whatever place you're going to, which might expand the options that you have to look at. Music and noise and people around who are also working in person. So some of that we call body doubling, right? Working around other people who are also working and making it easier for you to work. We call that body doubling, which I think of, maybe other people think of it this way. I don't know. Um, but I think of it as a shorthand way of saying, I am picking up on cues from other people, communication from other people in subtle ways that I can't quite necessarily call out, but that those cues, those things I'm detecting from those people are signaling to me that I could, should, will be working in a way that makes it easier to initiate because it feels appropriate, right? It's easier to start working when you're sitting at a table with 10 other people who are also working than it is to start working when you're sitting at a table with 10 other people who are playing Dungeons and Dragons without you, right? So body doubling, and we can look at ways to replicate that. And then the music and noise, that's interesting to me. Say more about the right level, the right amount of engagement? Music and noise. What's the right level of music and noise for you? And I keep forgetting that I can't wait for an answer because there's a delay. Body doubling group, but I never want to join. It sometimes helps, but it feels weird. Okay, so we could look at that straight up through accomplishment equation lens and say, okay, the feeling weird is part of the cost that you're paying in order to get the value of the help that the body doubling group gives you. I'm not sure it needs to be in the background. Okay, I have some thoughts and follow-up questions there, but body doubling group. So are you willing to pay the cost of it feeling weird in order to get the value out of it? We could then look at that as its own problem too. How do we get you to be able to engage in the body doubling group without feeling as weird about it as you do? Bring the cost down. Or how do we find a different body doubling group or situation that doesn't have that same cost of feeling weird? Really, my biggest question would be, what about it feels weird to you? What element of it, what way of interacting, what thing you're observing or thinking or feeling or experiencing is weird? Yeah, I'm going to make some guesses here, but I would guess that the coffee shop noise is not the part that is helpful for you. The music may be, especially if, here's a guess, and you correct me because that's just doesn't help anybody for us to like make a guess and go forward as though it's accurate when it's not. Um, that having the music quote unquote away from me makes it less distracting. That having it away takes it from having the lyrics be very crisp and clear to the lyrics becoming more a part of the music, meaning you're still hearing the vocals, but not with the level of clarity and crispness that the words are popping out to you. If you think about them, you can get them, but you can also just focus on other things or whatever, and the vocals become part of the music. I'm not explaining this super well, but it seems to be, I've I've this is anecdotal, that for some people, and I put myself in this category, music can be helpful as a stim, a fidget, right? We talk about fidgets and stims as things that take some resources, therefore decreasing the amount of resources I have available. Particularly stims and fidgets are environmental, physical things that I'm engaging with, that therefore decrease the amount of resources I have available to go to my internal experience. So if my internal experience is more intense than I want it to be, good, bad, or otherwise, I can decrease the intensity by engaging with the environment. And I want to do that by interacting with or exposing myself to environmental physical data that my brain will pick up, but that is not problematic. There's a difference between having people around doing things, priests doing their own thing, people around talking to you, moving around, having people sit on a screen, watching you sit on a screen. I see. Engaging environment without feeling scrutiny. Well, it's funny because the way you describe that, it sounds like it's actually not an engaging environment. Kind of the point of what it seems like you might be saying is that you're allowed to be invisible, more or less, that you don't have to engage with anybody. You can if you want, and you can people watch and whatever, but that nobody's demanding anything of you. Whereas if they're all sitting on a screen watching you, you feel as though you have to do something, perform something, that they're looking for something from you, which of course we all use words differently, but I would not call that engaging. In fact, part of what you're talking about, I think I've mentioned this concept before, but people talk about sensitivities. To me, that's like something that, oh, everybody knows sensitivities. And I know that's not the case. It's not generally a widespread thought of thing, but in the world of neurodiversity or ADHD or autism, whatever, sensitivities is talked about quite a bit. But I don't like, why do I need to say what I don't like? I don't need to say that. Well, I do. I don't know how else to say it. I don't like when people tell me that things work without explaining to me why and how they work. That bothers me for whatever reason. And I am certainly not alone in this, especially among neurodivergent people. So when people describe stimming or fidgeting or sensitivities as just this is what it is, and it impacts a person in such and such a way without any explanation of why. I obsess over it until I can make up an explanation for myself, a narrative for myself that works, that matches the available data, right? Doesn't mean it's true. It just means that of the information I have, it fits into the narrative I've constructed. Therefore, it makes sense to me. Sensitivities, I find it useful to talk about sensitivity as, you think it's a problem if I'm talking out here? Uh, so we talk about hypersensitivity and hyposensitivity. Hyper, just generally, if that prefix is added to something, it means too much. Hypo means too little. So hypersensitivity means, in the way that I find it useful to discuss, your brain, for whatever reason, your attentional processes, for whatever reason, are admitting more data of that kind, whatever the category is, into your awareness. You're conscious of noticing, thinking about that type of data, disproportionate to what seems useful. And I say seems because we don't know, but the fire alarm is a constant example here, right? That in that first moment when that shrill fire alarm at a school goes off, all of us have a split second, a moment of, oh yeah, that hurts. It's painful and uncomfortable. For most people, that lasts for only a moment until you very quickly identify what the sound is. It's a fire alarm. It's designed to work that way so that no matter what else you're doing, you catch it when it happens, right? But then it's no longer useful to be caused pain by paying that close of attention to the sound. Initially, it's unavoidable, but as soon as you match it against your perceptual set of fire alarm, well, now I know what it is. And from now on, the only utility in noticing it is to know, is it continuing or did it stop? So I don't need the depth of detail, the specifics of the noise, the sound. And therefore, I can free up a lot of, in that moment, everything shoved out of awareness because I need room for all this to figure out what is that alarming sound. Oh, now I know what it is. I only pay this much attention and I can start thinking about other things again. Some people, for some reason, whatever that reason might be, that initial moment doesn't go away. It stays painful. It stays that the brain is admitting so much information about that into awareness that there's no room for something else. So that would be a hypersensitivity. I'm noticing things disproportionately more than seems useful. Hyposensitivity would be the opposite. I'm noticing something less than seems useful. And then we just connect those things in a pattern. I notice sounds more than seems useful. I notice smells less than seems useful, right? Long way of getting to, mostly people discuss, well, primarily auditory sensitivity, but sometimes the other, five senses about interacting with the world outside of our body: sight, smell, sound, taste, and touch. But we can do this with any category, right? If all we're saying is I take in data more than seems to be useful or less than seems to be useful in some kind of pattern, I can make that pattern anything I want. Well, one that I find useful to talk about a lot is social sensitivity, that I seem to notice things about other people more than seems to be useful. That even though these people are doing their own thing, for example, the barista is doing their stuff, people are walking around talking, whatever, and even though theoretically none of that has anything to do with me, and therefore it's not information that I really need to be aware of, I'm aware of it anyway. Honestly, and again, still anecdotal and utility, not accuracy and whatever, but I find with ADHD and autism especially, you're good, David, um, that seems to be very common. I think people talk about this as highly sensitive people, empaths, type 2 on the Enneagram, I think it is. I just am aware of other people a lot, whether that means that other people are in my physical environment and therefore I'm paying attention to them even when I don't think it's useful to, and it would be more useful to spend those resources elsewhere. But even if they're not in my environment, I'm thinking about them a lot. I find this to be a useful way of looking at things. So, having said all that, I would suggest that you have a social sensitivity, and that being at the coffee shop, a lot of what you're trying to talk about is effectively stimming, meaning some problem that you're having, in this case, the fact that you're not able to get work done, has to do with the fact that you're dedicating actually too much of your cognitive resources to the task in a way that is unhelpful, causing you problems. And therefore, having some of those resources drawn to, sorry, I just got a message that I don't understand and distracted me. Said, have fun trying to eat. I don't know what that means. Having those resources drawn to the environment pulls them away from the intensity of the internal experience. In other words, I can make a guess now, and you tell me that at least some of the time, but probably quite a bit of the time, when you are struggling to get started on work, get work done, you are actually thinking a lot about the work that you need to do, right? It's not that you're quote unquote distracted, right? In particular, one thing that again I find useful, I want to be clear here about none of these are declarative statements about what any of this means, just I find it useful for myself and for clients um, to talk about in terms of neurodiversity, neurodivergence, is being aware of possibilities, right? Like a common thing that neurodivergent people will talk about online is those neurotypical people who just they know all the unwritten rules of communication in society and they know what everybody else means. They communicate with each other in ways that I just don't understand. It's a valuable gripe because it's looking at my experience and therefore what experience would be different from mine that would be more enjoyable, but it's not a real thing. It's not something that anybody actually experiences. Everybody misinterprets things sometimes. Everybody gets things wrong sometimes, right? Not to the same extent, but you know, I'm not trying to detract from or minimize, and obviously my social sensitivity is affecting me right now. You want me to pause this or end this? Okay. If you walk behind me, just so you know you're on camera for a moment. Okay, just making sure. So when trying to start on a task, one thing that might be stopping you is that you're engaging with thinking about so many different variables and possibilities of how the task could go. What's the best version? How, like, for example, if you're trying to write an email and you start writing a sentence and then you rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it, or add another sentence and add another sentence to clarify and clarify and clarify, that only would be happening because you're aware of the multiple ways that somebody could interpret what it is that you're writing. So if I'm, as I do, if I'm doing one of those two things, it's because I'm trying to convey something. I'm trying to have an impact on the person, share some information or whatever. And I use words to do that. And then once I have those words down, I think about how could these words be interpreted? Because one interpretation is the one that I'm going for, but are there any others that might be problematic, right? In particular, is anybody going to take offense to something that I'm saying? If I'm asking a question, are they going to assume that that's a criticism? And so then I want to clarify. But I'm only going to spend those resources to clarify because the brain's a cognitive miser if it seems useful or necessary to do so, if I have a reason to do so. And I'm only going to have a reason to do so if I'm aware of the fact that what I'm saying or writing could be interpreted differently than I intended to be, which means that I have to do a lot of perspective taking and think about how other people might encounter, deal with this, right? What this comes out to in practice a lot of the time is people who want to figure out exactly what's going to work or exactly how things are going to go before they start doing anything. That before I start working on this song that I want to write, I need to make sure that I'm figuring out the perfect song to write and that people will love it and that I won't be embarrassed by it because I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to engage in something and then fail at it or quit later and blah, blah, blah. So I like the way you're phrasing it. Need to not look at it directly is I need to be less aware of the various possibilities here and more aware of the physical environment and my reality. Because the more I think, the more I'm engaging in things that aren't actually true of my environment. That's what thinking is. It's useful. It's good. It's not a bad thing, although it can obviously be. but I'm not paying attention, including to the fact that, for example, I have a blank page in front of me. If I notice that there's a blank, because if I'm thinking, I'm writing words in my head and editing them, I'm imagining the person reading them on the other end. I'm not paying attention to the fact that none of that exists yet. I can't edit something that doesn't exist. Where on the flip side, if I'm only aware of the blank page in front of me and I'm not thinking at all, well, then I'm just going to start writing some gibberish or something because I need something down and there's nothing down. So I got to make there be something down. But if I'm not thinking at all, I can't construct that well. So we're aiming for the balance. But yeah, it's entirely possible that part of the reason you're having a hard time getting work done is because you are thinking too much about how to do it correctly and you haven't come to a decision on what is the correct way to do it. Same with like the interpretation, the neurotypical thing, right? If someone says, hey, this was great, we should do it again sometime. Do they mean earnestly that they enjoyed this and they would like to set up another time and they're being vague and non-specific in order to respect the fact that I might not want to, or they don't know what my schedule is and they want to make it open and easy? Or they might be saying that because they actually don't enjoy this and they want to get out of it and they don't want to do it again. So they're leaving it vague so that it's not a commitment to anything. Could be either of those. So I use context to make my guess about what it is. And of course, it could be a bunch of other things. But until I arrive at a guess, if I think it's 50-50, right, it could be that they like it and they want to hang out again. It could be that they don't like it and they feel so awkward that, the only way to get out of here is to lie about liking it. If it's 50-50, I'm not going to do anything because any response I would give that's suited to one of those things is not suited to the other. So before I give a response, I need to do more data gathering. Or if I'm stuck and I can't get more data, this is much less efficient, but very common. I need to think more, as though if I continue to think and think and think, I'll be able to arrive at a conclusion. When really all I'm doing is telling stories in my head that make sense to me until I arrive at one that works, right? Sorry, another strange message I don't understand. Um, Coffee shops provide like an external source of dopamine for me. Oh man. Doesn't really feel like thinking about it. It feels like just sitting in the stress of having to do a task. It's possible it's a wall of awful because I've always had executive function issues for so long. I like the construct, the wall of awful, Brendan Mahan's thing, because it makes the point that every time you do a thing in a way that isn't successful or in a way that's difficult, then the next time you do that thing, it will be that much more difficult to do it in a new way, which this way would be theoretically successful or not uncomfortable, right? It's just a way of shorthanding kind of habits and neurons that fire together wire together. So every time I sit down to write, and instead of writing, I agonize and agonize and agonize, makes it so that the next time I sit down to write, the easier option is to sit down and agonize, just like I did the first time. In order to shift that, it takes more effort to do something different. And the more I do it the same way, the more effort it takes to shift when I do eventually shift it. And the more I have to continue to put in that effort until this new way becomes the new habit. I sometimes struggle with the concept of the wall of awful in the way that people utilize it to kind of just mean every time I failed has been a psychologically painful experience for me, and therefore I now have a psychological incentive to avoid the task, which, yeah, is one way of looking at it and could theoretically be true. I don't find it to be super useful to look at it that way. I don't think that's the way he meant it. I think he meant it to be for people to have a way to understand language to use to understand why something keeps going badly for them and in fact gets worse and worse. But regardless of all that, if you break down to it like specifics, granularity, it's still the same thing. It's when I do A followed by B, the next time I do A, it's going to be followed by B unless I put effort in to make it something else. The more I do A followed by B, the harder it gets to change it. I have a similar issue with the way that ADHDers talk about dopamine, because again, a very useful shorthand, especially for communicating with people who don't understand what you're trying to share or who find ADHD to be an invalid thing or an excuse or that you don't really have it or whatever. Talking about dopamine makes it physical, right? And so it can be very helpful for someone to say, instead of what they had been saying, oh, if I do this thing, I enjoy it, to say, oh, if I do this thing, I get dopamine release from it. Same thing. We're saying the same thing, but making it about my biology and my neurobiology. For some people, that makes it easier for me to reckon with, because now I'm not saying, oh, I'm a failure and it's a character flaw. I keep just doing the stuff that's fun. It's no, I needed dopamine. And so I did, but it's the same thing. It's the same behavior. It's just different language. And of course, things like this, where I understand you're using it as a shorthand, but of course, nothing is an external source of dopamine. You create dopamine within your body. Things stimulate the release of dopamine, external things, your observation of them and your experience of them. But when we shorthand it that way, it's like the sticky answer. We stop looking at other explanations, right? Like, why does fidgeting help you? Why does stimming help you? We mostly just shorthand that as because it helps people with ADHD. I think my mic died there. It's a briefer, more efficient way to say that. I lost track of that mic thing. What was I saying? Feel awkward using dopamine. I'm not sure if that's the exact mechanic happening, but also doesn't really fit into to say external source of spoons. Yeah. So, well, and that's kind of the point. Oh, back to stimming and fidgeting. Yeah. To say it helps people, it helps autistic people to regulate their emotions to stim. Okay, but why? So the way I've made sense of that is to talk about we have two different finite resources that are involved in anything we consciously do. Oh, hold on. Do I have the other mic nearby? It was one of my head. 1 second, I'll be right back. All right, hopefully this works. We'll see. Let me know. Oh, is there a duck? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, waterfowl. Two different finite resources involved in any task that you use consciousness for. One is attention, the other is awareness. Attention is data per moment. It's the gate. It's the processes that dictate which things enter into awareness in the first place. Awareness is short-term storage. We call it working memory, short-term memory, different, you know. So once I become aware of something, sometimes I become aware of things that I then immediately let go of and don't keep in my awareness, in short-term memory. Sometimes I keep things in there because it seems useful to carry that around conceptually, that data, even when I've shifted the environment so that it's no longer present for me to observe. So the way I like to look at fidgeting, stimming, that kind of thing is there are things, sensitivities, patterns that I have that dictate that, for example, this is a very common fidget for me to just hold this smooth charging case for my earbuds, sometimes open and close the thing, but a lot of times just kind of like feeling the roundness and the smoothness of it. For whatever reason, tactile sensitivity, auditory, whatever you want to call it, my brain dedicates some of my attention to this data, the feel of this in my hand, kind of like a grounding exercise in a way, right? So I therefore have less attention available to go to other things. But because this is non-problematic, it's repetitive, it's not novel, it's not involved in any like consequences, good or bad for me. It's just a momentary experience. As soon as I become aware of it, I immediately let go of it. So it doesn't take up any awareness. So stimming, fidgeting, those things are things. What do you need? Ah, those things take attention, but not awareness, which means then that my awareness is freed up to be used to pull things out from long-term memory to combine. What do you need now? You don't have to crawl. I need to give an example. I'm getting so distracted. So, well, there you go, right? Like that sentence, this concept that I'm trying to share, is something that the reason it came up no longer exists. So if I get disrupted in the process, the A follows B follows C. Yeah, I said that backwards, but you get it. If that process gets disrupted, I have to have remembered, I have to have stored in awareness the reason that I started saying this thing, or what it was that I started saying, so that I can get back to it, because the initial prompt is no longer present for me to observe. While it's in there, I'm going to pull up things from memory, right? Everything I'm saying is not all about what's happening in this moment. It's something in the moment that triggers me to think about or seems useful to bring something else from long-term memory into short-term memory, into working memory. We call that retrieval. But in order to do that, I need room in my awareness to pull things out. So the more deeply I want to think about something, what we mean is taking some data from the environment and some data from long-term memory, and then combine those and use logic and reason to kind of extrapolate patterns and things from there. If I want more room to be able to do that stuff, I need to get rid of anything else in there. One way to do that is to get into a situation where there's not much for me to pay attention to that would be a higher priority on a level that would compete with the thing I'm trying to focus on. So I eliminate all the stimuli, right? Because then my attention doesn't have much that it's identifying. My attentional processes don't have much that they're identifying in the environment that they bring into awareness to disrupt something in the first place. Another way of doing that is to focus on, or as much as possible, bring in data from the environment that is non-problematic and non-useful, so that as soon as it comes into awareness, it's dropped again immediately, leaving that space free. That's why it helps me to fidget, helps me focus to fidget. That's why it helps me regulate my emotions to stim. And these are the same things, we just use different words for them, as far as I'm concerned. I feel like I gave a long, rambling, disjointed explanation of that. Point is, if you notice, like we said at the beginning, that a shift in context is helpful to you, it might mean it's worth exploring that the problem, or at least part of what's causing the problem, is the extent to which you are thinking about the thing. The new context makes it so that you can't think about it as much because you have to pay attention to other things. So theoretically, if that is the case here, then you could replicate that effect with any kind of fidgeting or stimming that works for you, which means information that my brain is going to admit into awareness, disproportionate to how useful it is. I'm going to notice it, but it's not useful. So I notice it and forget it, notice it and forget it. So any stimming and fidgeting, and you got to find that balance of, I notice this, but not so much that I can't get rid of it right away. With music, for example, lots of studies on things like listening to 8-bit video game music helps productivity. Listening to instrumental music helps productivity. For many people, I think of myself this way. I engage with music that has lyrics primarily through the language of the lyrics. I am very, very language oriented. Call it a language sensitivity if you want. So if I can hear and make out the lyrics, then I'm thinking about the lyrics and what they might mean and putting it together. It's the same thing I do with poetry. And, you know, once those words come in, then I get to bring other things up and see what it evokes for me and blah, blah, blah. But music that doesn't have lyrics, I notice it, but I can't really do much with it for whatever reason. That's not true of everybody, for me. So instrumental music is in a way a stim. For me, I rely on humming as my version of that more than anything, because I like generating the vibration myself in addition to just hearing it. So if that's the case, you could replicate the effect by doing any kind of stimming or fidgeting that works for you, but you got to experiment and find that balance of, it draws my attention, but doesn't stay in my awareness. In particular, it seems like you might have a social sensitivity, which would explain why being at the coffee shop is helpful to you, but being in the group is not as helpful to you. Because being at the coffee shop is that level of, okay, I notice, I pay attention to, and I'm aware of things about other people, because for whatever reason, I just seem to do that as a pattern. But none of this information actually impacts me or is relevant to me, so I forget it right away. So it's a stim. Whereas in the group with people focused on me, I am still noticing other people, and it's helpful in that way, like body doubling is. But also, I can't let go of it right away because I have a relationship with these people. This is a group. I'll be here again. I'm going to be thinking about, am I doing this the way they want me to be doing it? Do they like what I'm doing or not like what I'm doing? And I might be really annoyed by the fact that I'm thinking about that stuff. Foreign language playlist, that's a good idea. Yeah, sometimes you focus on trying to understand. And that's the key. We can't predict these things in advance. You just experiment. See, I think this might work for me. Oh no, I'm thinking about it too much. I got to change. Try something else. So you can still change your environment in that way. Remember, I was saying at one point that shifting the context from here to being in the coffee shop is just a bucket that contains many, many, many specific contextual changes. So we can delve into it. Now we've come up with a theory. Now we come up with an intervention to test that theory and see what happens. What are things that you can do, right? So playing music on speakers, you've said, using a foreign language playlist, you've said. You could even do things like put up posters. This would help more for somebody who has a visual sensitivity, right? Put up posters in the room that you only put up when it's time for you to work, or put a stream on in the background, whether it's me or anybody else. Just put a stream on in the background so that it doesn't actually matter if you participate or not, because the stream's going to go either way, but it's still tapping into that social sensitivity. Of course, we could look the other direction and say, well, what options do you have to be able to go to the coffee shop, right? All the programs are on your desktop. Can you move them to a laptop or get some mobile version of them so that you could move it? I'm assuming that that's a no. That's why I didn't talk about it, because I assume that you would have considered that if that was an option. Could also be things like we could split up ideation and execution, which I find to be useful a lot, meaning coming up with the idea of what I'm going to do in specific detail and then doing it are two different things. So I might have the aim of, I want my backyard to be more enjoyable to me. Now, to do that, I have to come up with ideas of what changes I could make that would make it more enjoyable to me. And then I have to settle on some of those and then do the process of executing them. So even if I have a full plan of what to do, it's still going to take me the time and the energy, however many hours, days, whatever, to go do it. So I don't know what programs you're using on the computer, but it could be that you're using those for the execution, and you could do some ideation at the coffee shop. You could take the problem that you're trying to work, go to the coffee shop, work the problem on paper until you come up with something to do, and then go back to your house and or your apartment, where you live, and start executing from there. It'll get the ball rolling. Yeah, I need money to work, but need to work for money. Yeah. Another possibility would be to look at something like public libraries, but again, I don't know what programs you're talking about. It might be something that you can utilize on like a public library computer, which would replicate some of that coffee shop stuff theoretically. In terms of the ideation execution split, well, I guess it could be the other way too. That seems less likely that you're using the programs for the ideation, figuring out what to do, but you don't need them to execute. um, Maybe an internet cafe. Those are more popular in some areas than in others. Well, if you figure out, so yeah, library is too quiet, you try to focus, it's too much. By the way, just as a quick, focus is not a thing. That's not a thing that happens. It's like you don't have focus or place focus on a thing. All we mean is your attention is bringing in the amount of data that you need to bring in about this thing. Your awareness is dedicated to this thing in the extent it needs to be in order to be able to move forward on this thing. What we really mean is the lack of distractions, because I can't make myself focus on one thing. Right? I can't try not to think about a purple elephant, right? Even if I'm saying don't think about a purple elephant, I'm putting effort into that. So thinking don't think about a purple elephant is a thought about a purple elephant in a way. So I have no ability to actively make myself focus. What I'm hoping to do is be in a context, in an environment in which my resources are drawn to the task at hand and not to other things, at least to the extent necessary for me to do this task. If it's drawn to other things, I call those things distractions. But again, a distraction is not a thing. It just means I'm paying attention to something, but in this case, in a way that I don't like, because I would like those resources free to be able to go to the other thing I'm trying to focus on. If I do get distracted, I need to deal with that. There is no active process to shut out distraction. And like you said, I go insane trying to focus. If you actively try to make yourself focus, you actually make yourself less focused because you're not thinking about the task, you're thinking about your cognitive state, which is a separate thing. And the more you try to focus, the more you're thinking about your cognitive state, and therefore the less you're thinking about the task. It's part of the reason that the stimming and stuff is helping you in the first place, right? So if you can find more stims and fidgets and bring something on headphones to use at the library, because you could replicate everything about the coffee shop except for the food and drink available and the music and noise. But if you can use your headphones to replicate the music and noise, then you just got to look at that other last element, the food and drink available. I like this. I have so much more fun giving like specific thoughts and suggestions, knowing that like I don't have enough information to know what will work or won't. That's always the case, but especially something like this interaction. But it's a lot more fun to have something specific and practical to hang all these theories and frameworks on to be useful instead of just sharing them because I hope they will be useful. So I appreciate you sharing all this. Another thing that you can do, by the way, start breaking work down into categories. I need to get work done. Well, work is different things. Some are very small differences. You know, it's the same spreadsheet, but different numbers. Some are very big differences. Work can be the work I'm doing for my employer, but it can also be the work that I'm doing on my novel, right? Very different things. So you can start getting more refined buckets, smaller buckets, like we were talking about last week, for the different types of work and developing strategies that work for different types of it. Instead of, because again, if going to the coffee shop helps me do all the work that I struggle to do, why would I come up with any, why would I think any more deeply about breaking up the work or the elements of that environment that help me? It works until the context shifts and it doesn't. In this case, the context shifted, it doesn't work because you can't bring the computer with the programs that you need there. So then we go back and get more complex, break it into smaller pieces. Maybe I can come up with something that will help me with other parts of my work, but not this big piece or whatever. I got to go. I'm at the lake. I'm going to be with my family. Thank you. Thank you all for being here, for watching this. If you're here live, if you're watching it after, just I appreciate you. And specifically, Bast Insider, thank you for participating and interacting with me and making this much more fun and useful. A lot easier for me because I have a social sensitivity. If I'm thinking about the person that might be affected by this, and it's easier for me to think about the person that might be helped if I have more data about that person. So I can do it without anyone in the chat, a lot easier with someone in the chat. Anyway, thank you. Next week, Tuesday, 1 p.m. Central, the 2nd. The following week, Thursday, the 11th, 1 p.m. Central. After that, we'll be back to the regular Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Thank you all.